Welcome to Dog Day Afternoon. I am Gilles Gallant with BetsTV and FTNBets. You can follow me on Twitter at GDawg5000. And hey, look, it's the betting show where we talk NFL. We've got some sports betting advice, maybe some unsolicited life advice as well. Give a few picks along the way. And the main thing is we don't take ourselves too seriously around here. It is just a standard betting show with two white guys talking about the NFL. I mean, I can't say that there's enough of a demand and enough of a supply for that kind of content. And every week we're going to cover the latest odds in the NFL. And I like to give a platform to people that I'm a big fan of and talk shop about the betting industry and even the NFL. And we are going to introduce a very special guest here. It is the head of content with FTNNetwork, Josh Collachi. Josh, thank you for joining me on Dog Day Afternoon this week.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You just mentioned there that you like to share your platform with people that you like. So still waiting to figure out who that person is for today, but I'm happy to be on.
Yeah, I'm still kind of maybe on the fence of whether or not maybe we're friends or just proximity workplace acquaintances here. But no, at the same time, this is a guy I talk to literally every day about every piece of content that I do, every piece of content that's under the FTNNetwork brand, whether it be FTN Daily, FTN Bets, FTN Fantasy, FTN Data. Josh has his finger on it and has the finger on the pulse for all of it. And he is probably one of the key MVPs of making these sites and network go. So again, really big fan of his. Wanted to bring him on here to talk NFL with me this week and put him through the ringer here at the end of the show with a nice little rapid fire Q&A. But what we do here with Dog Day Afternoon is we always start off with a little bit of a hot take section because it's the sports industry, Josh. Everybody loves a good hot take.
Always.
And things that are apparent to me and maybe apparent to you. And it's a segment that I like to call Apparently. So we're going to start off with the first topic. And Josh, apparently the Arizona Cardinals are going 20-0. As far as I'm concerned right now, I can't see a team that could beat them. They took down the Rams, who I thought were the toast of the NFC. They pretty much laid waste to the Titans. Like all four games, I thought they have been the most impressive team through four games, and they're such a roller coaster of a team too. The way that they at one point, you're throwing an interception here or whatever. You're all of a sudden throwing a bomb to the end zone. Now, Josh, is it apparent to you as it is to me that the Cardinals are going 20-0?
So here's what I'll say. I like Cliff Kingsbury. A lot of people do not. Obviously, big Kyler Murray fan, as many people are. I might have to say that you're crazy. They're not going 20-0. I think, honestly, though, I do think they have a chance to go 13-5, just going through and looking through the playoffs. I do think that once they get to the second level and hit the NFL postseason, it might be tough for them to advance further into the playoffs. But right now, I think they definitely are the best team in the NFC West. There are some issues with every other team out there, and I just think for the sake of what the Cardinals are doing right now, they have some young guys on defense playing really well. And honestly, right now, probably the front runner for NFL MVP, at least in my eyes, in Kyler Murray.
Absolutely. And again, I think for anybody who's watched the first few episodes of the show, this is kind of the noodle experiment. I'm just kind of cooking up some noodles and throwing them on the wall, see which one sticks. And honestly, any team to go 20-0 just seems outlandish to even think. But at the same time, they are a team right now that I think it's very difficult to stop them defensively. I can't see too many options of how teams do it. And I just think that right now they have to be the front runner in the NFC. I know that some people, you might have a case with Tampa. You can say that about the Rams. Maybe there's some people who also feel that way about the Packers. But for me, the Cardinals right now are the toast of the NFC. All right, now, Josh, we're going to move on to the next topic here. Apparently, the Dallas Cowboys don't suck. Woo! All right. So I'm going to tell you a little story here about the offseason. I have now endured many of offseason where I am getting roasted for being a Cowboys fan. I'm being told that I trust your judgment, but I hate the fact that you're a Cowboys fan, so we're not going to give you any credit for what you think, and that the Cowboys are overrated and whatever else. I just want people to acknowledge that the team doesn't suck. Is that an outlandish take to have?
So, little bias here, as you can probably see in the backdrop right here. I got to say, legally, in my life contract as an Eagles fan, that, yes, the Cowboys do suck. But somehow I married a Cowboys fan, and I can say that there are Cowboys games on the TVs here sometimes on the weekends. But I have to say, honestly, without bias, they don't suck in certain situations. I do think that Mike McCarthy sucks. He has to suck until further notice. We saw that what happened at the end of the Green Bay Packers era. But Kellen Moore does not suck at all. He's an absolutely fantastic coach, one of my favorite offensive coordinators in the NFL. You can see that they do different things, right? Like he's obviously a big part of why Dak Prescott has been successful in the last 18 or so games, even after an injury, what they do with the weapons they have there. And I think it goes without saying sometimes that the Cowboys are creative, but that's very hard to do in the NFL because it is a copycat league. It is a lot of, hey, let's see what Andy Reid does. Let's see what Sean McVay does. So being unique in the NFL right now as an offensive coordinator is tough to do. We saw it a little bit last week, right? We line up Ezekiel Elliott as fullback, and you have him run a speed option after a handoff to Tony Pollard. That kind of stuff does not go unnoticed here. And even though I must say the Cowboys suck from a fan perspective, it is very, very fun to watch Kellen Moore. So I kind of have to agree with you that they don't suck, but it pains me to say that. And I'm probably going to be getting some family members running up the stairs now to kind of knock me off this horse.
Well, as an Eagles fan, I think you have to even just admit for one night the Cowboys didn't suck because obviously week 3, just one night though. and I think the one thing that people really kind of lost track of is offensively, the Cowboys were already there. And I don't think really people had to disagree with that. I think if you look at their wide receiver core, you look at the running backs, I mean, Dak was a very popular pick for MVP coming into the season. The offensive line, while Tyron Smith is getting older and Zach Martin is still probably one of the best guards in the league. Again, it was more of a regressed unit compared to maybe years past when maybe they were touted as the best offensive line in the league. But I think defensively, I'm just as surprised as probably other people of how well they're performing. Like I was high on Micah Parsons, but I wanted Patrick Surtain. Like that was, I don't think that's a real hot take to have because our secondary has been getting gouged for years. And all of a sudden, even Trayvon Diggs, who is now an FTN darling, in futures of betting circles with the way that he's coming in now for potential defensive player of the year with how many interceptions he has. I was a little down on him coming into the year because, again, he was a rookie, but at the same time, I watched him in a lot of high-profile matchups, and he was getting torched. And it wasn't fun to be a Cowboys fan for a lot of last season. And I think that's the one thing that you've seen improve. It's just that, if you have another blue chipper like Micah Parsons come in and actually make an impact, if you actually have somebody in the secondary that can play one-on-one matchup defense, who knows what could happen? So I think that's the one component that's been missing. 4 weeks. Let's not start kissing our own ass too quickly here. A lot can happen, but at the same time, it's just nice to be a Cowboys fan again, despite the fact that people would think that it's never been nice to be a Cowboys fan from your standpoint.
The good part about them too, you talked about their defenses. They kind of took a little bit of heat when drafted a linebacker, right? Where you had Jalen Smith, where I think a lot of people that watch Jalen Smith, you really realize that he was a volume tackler, right? Doesn't necessarily mean he was in the right place at the right time, struggled in coverage. And we've seen that with his snaps go down this year. But they have Van Der Esch and they drafted Micah Parsons, who has turned into an unbelievable pass rusher, having to fill the needs for injuries there, of course, in Dallas. So that has been fun to watch. It's been fun to watch Trevon Diggs trying to take his next step in his advancement as a corner. I think that defense is maybe 2 or 3 pieces away. And obviously we see with this NFL trade deadline being pushed back in recent years, they may have a chance to go get somebody, whether that is a Darius Slay from the Eagles. I doubt it goes in division, but somebody like that might be a target for them. That's something to keep an eye on for me, as I do think they will try to push towards going for a division crown because Washington has not been as good as everybody thought they would be.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to the next subject. And I'm going to step on my friend Ian McMillan's toes here. He was on last week talking about a team that was completely overrated. And I think we saw that in week 4. And apparently, Josh, the Tennessee Titans are frauds. I cannot believe how bad of a loss that is to week 4 to the Jets. I'm sorry. I don't have any sympathy or any silver linings or talking about, we were missing this guy, No, you lost to the New York Jets, who through 3 weeks I would have pegged as going as 0-17. And for myself, is it as apparent to me as it is to you that the Titans are frauds, both in the AFC and maybe even the AFC South division.
They are frauds. They're completely fraudulent. And I'll tell you why. Listen, so the Tennessee Titans this year made a huge splash, right? Julio Jones, he may not be who he was in his prime, right? But he's still a great receiver for this NFL, for that division, whatever. So all we're going to see, hey, you know what? These guys are going to be healthy, and it's fine. And when they are healthy, it's going to be different. But we've seen what happens to this offense, or any offense really, when the offensive line is banged up, right? Taylor Lewan's banged up. Roger Saffold's banged up. When you do not have a good part of your offensive line or have weak depth there, literally nothing matters, right? You're not going to have a chance to do anything but hope Derrick Henry gets 4 yards after contact, which he's Derrick Henry, so he's going to do. But you can't lose to the Jets. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Zach Wilson, horrible first half, great second half, still the Jets, right? Tennessee
Corey
Titans,
Davis revenge game, man.
Right, there you go. See, there's a revenge game. You have guys like A.J. Brown, Julio Brown out. That's fine, whatever.
Yeah, and again, it was
the Jets.
Things.
You're fraudulent. You don't lose to them.
It's mind-boggling. Again, if I had to pick like the biggest I think it was the biggest upset of the week, but just when you think about week 4 and you're just thinking about all the different games and outcomes, and that game kind of gets lost in the shadows because of some of the other stuff that we saw happen. But I'm not letting the Titans off the hook. Like, you had a chance after beating the Colts to basically take a commanding lead, like with that win. I mean, they already had a commanding lead, but like now the door is open and you could potentially still let the Colts come back and win this division. For me, I'm very disappointed with what I saw in Tennessee so far, and especially in week 1 against the Cardinals, where I predicted, because I felt like their secondary was vulnerable, even though I'm still a huge fan of Kevin Byard. They get beat over the top. And that's why one of my favorite touchdown scorers of week 1 was Christian Kirk, because I thought he's just going to run bombs on them. And what did he do? He caught 2 touchdowns against them. So you've seen that already through 4 weeks of them getting beat on these deep, long passes. And yeah, so for me, I can't endorse the Titans. I'm not going with them anymore. I might not even do my Titans week 5 preview now. So just a heads up, Josh. Just as a result, that's what's happening now. So.
Yeah, we're just going to change that title to fraudulent odds. That's going to be the name.
Tennessee frauds, week 5 odds. All right. Now we're going to move on to some futures odds for a few teams. I like to highlight 3 teams each week, different teams as well, especially ones that might be relevant, and then as well, like some teams that maybe we're undervaluing as well, that maybe there might be an opportunity to jump on. Now, we already talked about them to start off the show, but it's the Arizona Cardinals, Josh. The futures odds have moved a lot this morning from week 4. For example, for Arizona right now, their Super Bowl odds have dropped to 14-1. Kyler Murray is the favorite for MVP now at 5-1. Cliff Kingsbury, NFL Coach of the Year, at 9-1. And the Cardinals are now co-favorites to win the NFC West at +170 with the Rams. Josh, if you were to bet a unit of your hard-earned FTN dollars, what futures odds there would you choose from of those 4?
So these are a bunch of good odds, honestly. I think, Joe, one of the things that I'm looking at here is if the Cardinals end up 20-0, obviously, what we talked about earlier, apparently they're going 20-0. So
you're clean sweeping that board.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is that whole thing happens, right? Clean sweep on the board. But honestly, I think the easiest bet right now is probably Kyler Murray. He is the favorite. It's 5-1. But over at FTNBets.com, Chris Meany, who I know is a great friend of both of ours, got Kyler at over 20-1 to start the season. So
yes, he
did. Me, doubling down on that at 5-1 would work here. If they win the NFC West and if they have one of the best records, get a bye in the first round, that whole deal, Cliff is probably a lock here for Coach of the Year. Now, obviously, we're in week 4. We still have 75% of the season to go. But if they continue to ascend the way that they have so far, Cliff has a chance at 9-1. The only thing for me with Coach of the Year is I think there's a lot of nuance that goes into a selection like that. So 9-1 might be a little bit too short for me. So one unit, I got to go with Kyler 5-1 here.
Yeah, and my biggest concern right now, Josh, with this team, and we saw this last year, is they really do go as Kyler Murray does. You saw last year after he had that shoulder injury in week 9, like both his production and their standings just started to dwindle. And that's what I worry, is that both Kingsbury is hinging on Murray, the Super Bowl is hinging on, like basically it's all hinging on Murray to get paid. And his playing style was actually, it's a little different. It's been a little different this year. Now he has scored 3 touchdowns in 4 games, but he's I find he's not scrambling in the pocket as much like the way that he was last year, where I almost wonder if maybe he was putting too much of the offense on his shoulders, and then obviously his shoulder gave out. So then that's what happens. But I think I agree with you right now. The best value is Kyler at plus 500. But I am still kind of eyeing the NFC West, because when you already have that win over the Rams, you're more than likely going to, I think, at least go 1-1 against both Seattle and San Francisco as well. I just think that they're already starting to build up a nice lead. And then you look at the Rams schedule, it doesn't get very easy as well. Like, and the fact that those guys have to play each other as well. I just think that the Cardinals are kind of in a good position going forward, especially with where they finished in the division, having to play, I believe, a third or last place schedule in the division, just having a little bit easier of a time to get there to the summit. So I think we're both on the same page that I think Kyler is probably the best value at this point, but I do think that there is still some value as well with NFC West. I think the Super Bowl, I think at 14-1, I think we kind of missed the boat on the high point there. And honestly, with Cliff, it's not that I don't think he's a good coach, even though I think he does make one mistake per game that I always just shake my head. But I think right now, especially after that win on Monday night, it's going to be difficult to break the narrative of how good Brandon Staley has been with the Chargers so far. And it's just, I think the narrative plays a bigger part in Coach of the Year, more so than just what your standings are. Because again, you almost have to, if there's two teams and they're both 13-3 or 13-4 rather, for a 17-game schedule, you're almost kind of trying to devise like, okay, well, what gives that person the edge? And so sometimes it is as simple as a narrative. Okay, we're going to move to the next team now. Team number 2 for some futures odds takes. It's the Cincinnati Bengals, Josh. Cincinnati, very good through 4 weeks to win the Super Bowl, though. Odds makers not giving them much respect at plus 15,000 to win the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow for MVP at 66-1. Zach Taylor plus 3,000 to win Coach of the Year. And a sneaky one here, Josh. Bengals to win the AFC North at 9-1. Of these 4 futures odds, Josh, which one would you put a unit on to go forward for the remainder of the 2021 season?
So I think what I have to do here is if I have a unit and I'm betting on the Bengals, to be 100% honest with you, I'm just going to wait for a week. I like them. If I had to take a unit to answer your question, it's going to be likely on the Bengals to win the division, because I do think that is the most likely scenario of all of these. We're looking at value, of course, is what we like to do for betting. The Super Bowl, that's just not going to happen. Right? It's just not going to happen.
Tough. It's like you could argue that they're the 4th best team in their own division, depending on how you feel about the Steelers.
MVP, again, the same sort of situation where Burrow has a lot of hills to climb to be able to get there. And I just can't bring myself to bet anything on Zach Taylor, no matter what. It's just not going to happen.
No. Yeah, no, and I agree with you on that too. I think AFC North, especially just because they're already 3-1, they beat the Steelers. But I think it's going to be like, and the one thing that I liked about them too is that they did play the Browns fairly well last year. Pretty much got trounced by the Ravens last year. But again, it's just there's a lot of games to be played. But I just kind of feel like I don't really know if there's another level they can go. Like I feel like we're seeing the best of them right now. Like I don't think defensively they were very sharp against Jacksonville and other games as well. Like even week 1 against the Vikings, like they should have won that game, but the Vikings just are, Vikings going to Vikings sometimes. And Joe Burrow for MVP, again, it's so like we're probably 2 years ahead on that futures prop at this point. And Zach Taylor, again, there's so many better narratives of Staley and Kingsbury, and even Sean McVay could potentially have a case by the end of the year. So yeah, I agree with you. I think AFC North is probably the best value just based on where we're at in the season and how they already have 3 wins. But of the 4, it's slim pickings, even though there is some good things brewing in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think honestly, to bring it full circle, if I'm taking one unit betting on the Bengals, I'm just going to wait for your touchdown props to come out, just to be quite honest with you.
Well, whatever you do, don't bet on Joe Burrow and then tweet it out that he scored until you actually see the extra point scored. Yeah, key lesson here. Yeah, you can't promote yourself as a touchdown guru until the touchdown is official. So
it's almost like you now got to wait for the extra point and the kickoff and the next drive because you never know.
Oh man, I probably thought I had to wait till at least halftime before I should have called it a winner. But that's the way it goes. I still like Joe Burrow. I still think he can score touchdowns here or there. I still think it was a BS overturn, but that's the way life goes. We're gonna move to our third team now, Josh, and It's the New York Giants, who I think had the most impressive win of Week 4. You could say it was the Jets. I think the Giants had the most impressive win of Week 4. Even if there wasn't many victories to claim throughout the first 4 weeks, Week 4 was definitely one of them. Look at their odds here, Josh, to win the Super Bowl. 25,000 to 1, or pardon me, plus 25,000, not 25,000 to 1, but plus 25,000. Daniel Jones for NFL MVP at plus 50,000. Saquon Barkley at Comeback Player of the Year at plus 3,000. And the Giants, the G-Men, to win the NFC East at 12 to 1. So we've got a Cowboys fan and an Eagles fan talking about the NFC East, about how we would bet the New York Giants. So I'm going to let you go first, Josh. How would you bet these props or futures, and which one would you put a unit on for the New York Giants?
This is a tough one. It really is, because it's not necessarily like the Bengals where none of it's going to happen, right? Like, we know the Giants aren't in position to win the Super Bowl this year, and Daniel Jones has a long way to go before he's MVP. But I think there's some value in Saquon. And I'll tell you why. I think that Comeback Player of the Year goes a lot of the way towards statistics, right? Where with volume of yards, touchdowns, what have you.
Narrative, too.
Right. And that's the second part of that, too, is Saquon coming back as honestly the main part of this offense once he is fully healthy and able to take the brunt of the workload, which we've seen last week for sure. Lined up a wide receiver, scored a touchdown, right? Scored that game-winning touchdown on the ground in overtime. The best part about the Giants and watching them is when they have a clean pocket. And we talked about this before the show.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Jones looked good. He did. And I can't discredit that. And I think that makes the offense go. And from that perspective, that gives Saquon a chance with that volume to really put up some numbers this year. So if I'm taking any units here, 30 to 1 to get Saquon to win Player of the Year or Comeback Player of the Year is probably where I'm going with this, just because there's not many other players that have a chance to have that amount of volume. And for when it comes to that in the NFL, if a guy stays healthy, especially at that position, we're talking about 10-plus touchdowns with the volume he can get. He can receive the ball. He can rush the ball. So we're talking about a guy that really take advantage of a lot of numbers. So for me, I like Saquon 30 to 1 there. And I'm actually quite surprised that BetMGM has the number up there like that.
It's because of Dak. Dak's already odds-on favorite to win. And my favorite part about it, too, is just that with the Giants and Cowboys playing this week, this could directly affect that futures market, both that one and the NFC East. And I think the one thing that I was really impressed with Week 4 is the fact that he did it on the Saints for Saquon, because if you go just since the start of last season and even the season prior, if you wanted to go even farther back, the Saints have one of the best rush defenses in the NFL. They allow like the fewest touchdowns and yards to running backs. Like, they're right there with Tampa and the Rams, and just very difficult to run on them. And then also just running backs just generally don't perform well against that team. So, and that's the one thing is, it's like, was it the Giants offensive line? Was it Saquon just outperforming them? Or was it the Saints who maybe they didn't show up that week? It doesn't really matter. The point is that they got the win, they got the W, and the Giants looked great in Week 4, something I could not say through the first 3 weeks, especially after that inexplicable Week 3 loss against the Falcons, which to me, we were talking about maybe some of the best wins, some of the best losses. I mean, the Titans probably had the worst loss this year. That loss, the Giants loss to the Falcons, was horrible, especially with the fact that it was Eli Manning day, like they had him there for halftime. Yep. It was just, it was like, I could not believe how bad they looked in that game, especially how good they looked in Week 2 against what I would consider a better defense in Washington than what the Falcons could put on the field. So those are the 3 teams. I'm with you. I'm probably looking at the NFC East at 12 to 1, just because, again, if the Giants do win that game, everybody's 2-2, or you're right there. Basically, it's all jumbled together. I think that there is still a chance for them to win the NFC East, just because the division's not great. So we're going to jump over to Week 5 odds now. And there's 4 games I sent you beforehand that caught my eye. We can deviate from these 4 games, but I wanted to ask you, Josh, of these 4 games, I'm going to read them off. Which one of these would you be considering betting for Week 5? First one, Packers 3.5-point favorites over the Cincinnati Bengals on the road. Eagles +4 on the road versus the Panthers. Bills +2.5 on the road versus the Chiefs. And yeah, that's what I've got so far. Those are the 3. We're going to go with those 3 because out of those 3, I mean, you know what? We'll throw a fourth one in. How about Colts +7 versus the Ravens? Just because, again, it was one of those games where I wasn't very enthused to bet. I think the Colts are going to get beat pretty handily, but we could save that for a second. Of those four, are any of these road underdogs, other than the Packers, who are road favorites, any four of those tickle your fancy?
I love the Packers this week, honestly. I think that this is one of those situations where you look at the lines, and the old adage, of course, is the books add 3 points for home field, right? So this in a neutral setting might be 6.5, or right. So you're really getting a chance to take advantage of that. I don't think that the Bengals have or deserve to have a chance to only just have 3 points over the Packers, right? Like, we're looking at the Packers as a team from last year in this same situation. The Packers are probably 6-7 point favorites. And I think that this is a line that you can exploit. You can get it all the way down to 3 in some places. I actually have it written down here that in some places, depending on your price, you have an advantage to get that and buy that down to 2.5, which is worth doing to cross over the 3. So I do like the Packers 3.5. It's probably one of my favorite spreads of the week. I just think that they're a more complete team, and there are more outcomes in this game when I'm looking at it. If you're simulating it from whether just from a fan perspective or whether you're looking at the numbers or projections or anything like that, there are way more outcomes in which the Packers cover here than the Bengals cover on the other side. I think you're relying on some turnovers. You're relying on Joe Burrow playing extremely well. And if you need the Packers to turn the ball over to win, that's where you get me, right? Rodgers doesn't throw interceptions. It's not necessarily known that Aaron Jones is a big guy that fumbles. The special teams is usually solid. So for me, I think there are way too many things that have to happen for the Bengals to win this game. And if you can buy it down to 2.5, you know, more than likely the team's going to win by more than 2.5 points. So for me, I like the Packers here for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that we saw through the first 4 weeks of the season is the Bengals can get beat by the number one wide receivers. You watch Justin Jefferson and Thielen basically do whatever they want in week one. Before Andy Dalton got hurt, Allen Robinson caught a touchdown against them with the Bears. Week 3, no Deontay Johnson, but even Juju scored. I kind of want to put that game as an aside, because I feel like anytime you play the Steelers, you can't grade your pass defense properly because he just looks so washed and cooked that to properly grade it, it's very difficult. So you almost have to take that variable into consideration. And even Trevor Lawrence, he looked good and was passing well against the Bengals. I just think that they came up short. So that's the reason why it's very difficult for me to envision how they could stop Devontae Adams. And, you know, I do think Randall Cobb is a little bit of a flash in the pan here, but even a guy like Allen Lazard, I think, could be able to beat them deep. Robert Tonyan as well. And even James Robinson looked like fantastic against them last week. So I can only imagine how Aaron Jones would look in this type of matchup. For me, of the 4, the matchup that I was actually considering, no joke, man, was your Eagles at +4. Because again, I think the Panthers are overrated. I think they're a little bit more upgraded just because of defense is just not paying attention to where Sam Darnold is at the goal line. Like, it's getting a little too much now, to the point like where, okay, guys, like, clearly he knows that you're not going to defend him, and he's going to try to run from the 5-yard line, especially with no McCaffrey. So at some point, a team has got to recognize that. And I think you're going to see a time where he tries to do that this week against the Eagles, and Fletcher Cox is just going to pound him into the ground. And I hope that happens. But at the same time, that's why, like, it's kind of past the magic number now where I like it. I think that if the Panthers do win, it would be a close win. It would probably be like by a field goal. So for myself, I was digging the Eagles. I'm not sure if I would take the money line in this spot, even though I am more of an underdog money line better. +4, I did like. I want no part of the Bills +2.5 against the Chiefs. I'm a little worried that the Chiefs are about to go on a revenge tour here right now. And we saw in this playoff game last year, Josh Allen's accuracy was like below 60%. And if you looked at the numbers just raw and just looked at how he was doing, like, they were converting third downs, but they were trading 3s for 7s. And on third down, they weren't converting. And I think the Chiefs are going to be able to it's just going to be a track meet, and you're not going to be able to keep up with them. So I know there's going to be people who are going to be like, I'm all over Bills money line in this scenario, looking at how poor the Chiefs defense has played through 4 weeks. I mean, you even just saw the Eagles, they still put up points on them, even though they allowed 40, you know, but at the same time, I can't trust the Bills in this scenario, especially like I really still have a bad taste in my mouth from that week 1 loss. Like I still don't understand what happened in that Steelers game because Ben looked exactly the same in week 1 as he's looked through week 2, 3, and 4, and he should not be throwing passing touchdowns against that team. That's just in my opinion. And now you're going to face Mahomes, who is just making a joke of football at this point, just throwing passes like this, and they're going for touchdowns. Yeah. It's ridiculous. So I'm a little worried that the Bills are going to get exposed here in week 5. And as for the Colts, no. In fact, like I feel like you can't. I talked about this last week, how I thought that the Miami during the week that I said that the Dolphins should be called the Dolphins because there's no D right now. They're not playing, and they were allowing like 27.7 points per game coming into that game. And you gave up 2 touchdowns to Mo Alley Cox, who was just
he was a basketball player in college, right? That's the buzzword.
yeah, which always just seems to transcend. Yeah, and but I think the Ravens are. I think a lot of people are looking at that Lions game still and thinking that they can't be as efficient offensively. Whereas if you take that one out, they've been great, and they basically went into Denver and just took over. It was like it wasn't even kind of close. So. Do you have any feelings about the Bills or Colts? Like, would you consider betting them as underdogs before we move on?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on a couple games you just mentioned there. Starting with the Eagles, I'm on the opposite side of you here. I do think 4 is a good number. It's a tough number to bet against too when you're taking a favorite. But I do think that the Eagles may struggle this weekend. And I think that because I think that while the Eagles have a young coaching staff, and that's a good thing for a lot of reasons, it also hurts them from an experience point of view. And Joe Brady and Matt Rule are literally 2 of my favorite coaches in the entire NFL for many reasons. Obviously, Matt Rule is more of a CEO-style head coach, but he has guys in place that really have done a great job. Joe Brady has done multiple offenses now over the past 5 years, where he with the Saints, over to LSU as an air raid, and now in Carolina was doing all sorts of different things with Sam Darnold and McCaffrey when he's healthy, using DJ Moore in the backfield, right, on that nice little Texas route touchdown. It's beautiful. I think that is something that they can really exploit against the Eagles coaching staff, that right now the defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, is struggling. The Chiefs didn't punt the whole time. Like, I'm watching this game. I'm like, oh, maybe they'll get a stop. No, not going to happen. No stop. So they didn't punt for the first, 7 drives or something like that. And they didn't attempt any field goals, so do the math, right? A lot of points. And I think something like that happens again where maybe they don't score 40, but I think it's quite easily can be seen that the Panthers are going to score 4 or 5 touchdowns. Moving on to that second game, Bills-Chiefs. I have a quick tidbit for you here, Jill. I love to live bet on Chiefs games, and I'll tell you why. So Pat Mahomes in his career, right, entering last week, when the Chiefs trail by 10 or more points, he's 10-6. That's ridiculous. Okay, that's absolutely ridiculous. And in the last 2 years, since 2019, 9-2. The Chiefs sometimes will struggle in the first half. Sometimes we see it, and whatever. They got to get their rhythm. Maybe they don't connect with Tyreek Hill, getting doubled. The game plan has to be changed at halftime, which Andy Reid's always been good at. When you live bet a game like this, you can take advantage of maybe that spread moving to Bills 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. And by the time it gets to that point, if that goes down, you can take advantage of getting a Chiefs money line at close to even money, depending on the point of the game. So for me, in a game that I don't like the pregame prices, I want to wait to bet that game in game for live betting, and it gives you a chance to take advantage of the value. If it doesn't show up, you don't have to bet it, and then you're not as uncomfortable. So definitely something like to take advantage of. Colts, Ravens. So Carson Wentz, we could do a whole show on Carson Wentz. We could do a whole show on his evolve from North Dakota State to the Eagles, the whole thing with Frank Reich,
Let it out. This is a safe space.
So let me just do it here. Otherwise, we'll be here for 6 hours, and neither one of us can stay here for 6 hours at this point. But Carson Wentz against pressure this year has not been good. It's obviously seen as something that's very obvious for quarterbacks to struggle under pressure, more so than in a clean pocket. But for Wentz, his career path has taken him as a guy that likes to improvise. So when he struggles with pressure, that's something that I really like to take a look at. We know the Ravens can get pressure. Only 5 more teams have blitzed. The 5 teams have blitzed more than the Ravens this year. And Carson Wentz's passer rating is 20 points lower. But also his yards per attempt is down 2 yards per attempt, right? Which 10 yards per attempt is elite. 8 is very, very good. So when you drop 2, That's 20%. And for Wentz, it's about 7.5 to 5.5. Of course, with dump offs, that happens a lot. The issue with the Colts now is they're going to have to score a lot to keep up with the Ravens. The Ravens, as you mentioned, they're going to get more efficient as the year goes on. They're getting Rashad Bateman back. Marquise Brown figured out how to catch a football again. So, like,
Bakersfield,
they can score some points in a hurry. Quentin Nelson's out for the Colts. Carson Wentz has struggled a bit. From a selfish point of view, as long as Wentz plays 75% of the snaps and they lose every game, that's fine with me.
One thing I wrote about the Colts this morning and just writing about this game, and what I discovered is I was kind of looking at the raw stats, and I was like, man, he only has one interception this year and one fumble, and he's only been sacked 5 times. Then you actually look deeper in the stats, and the Colts are bottom 5 in quarterback pressures allowed, and he's just been getting rid of the ball, luckily, and they haven't been converting third downs very well, other than this Dolphins game. And you mentioned it, Quentin Nelson not playing, Anthony Costanzo retired in the offseason. Like, this offensive line, which was considered a focal point of how strong they were, is just neutralized completely. And you see that right now with the results of Jonathan Taylor. Like, yes, again, he's played well in week 4, but the first 3 weeks he was non-existent, and people probably took him end of the first round, top of the second round, most likely in their fantasy drafts. Like, so a lot of people probably a little steamed about how the Colts season has gone so far. So yeah, we're going to move on now, Josh. I've got a couple of questions for you before we start the rapid fire Q&A, which is easily the best part of the show. And I say that with no bias. One of the things I love to ask people when I bring them on the show is somebody who is present on social media and Twitter and just in the gambling and fantasy communities, is the seriousness of it. And I talked about this at the start of the show. The show is like, we don't take ourselves too seriously. Like, again, we're literally being paid to talk about sports betting. Like, again, we're not meant to be serious. Like, we're not politicians here. But what I wanted to know is why do you think people in gambling and fantasy Twitters, like Twitter, the communities, take everything content creators like myself and others so seriously? Why do you think that is? And like, why is that every comment that we make, like, a little quip or, glib comment or whatever, why is it always taken as like gospel or truth?
So honestly, I think it's a very simple answer. And I know it's something that we can talk about a lot, but quite frankly, I think a lot of people on social media are literally on there to be right or to be wrong. And that's it. Social media is an escape. It's obviously something that's very, very prevalent in a lot of people's lives, especially if you're 40 or younger. And that's the majority of the fantasy and sports betting demographic, right? It's males 40 or younger. And I think a lot of it comes with, hey, I want to be right, I want to be wrong. And in sports, especially fantasy sports and betting, there's only 2 outcomes, right? You're either right or you're wrong. So I think anything you say, whether it's something like, hey, you know what, I want to use insert fullback first touchdown at plus 900, right? If you're wrong, it's okay. It's okay. But I think people take that as like you said, as word is bond. And it gets to the point where I think for some people, it kind of annoys them a little bit on the social media side because they're just looking at it as an escape. But there are a lot of people on social media that really just want to look at it and say, there's no sarcasm, you're right or you're wrong, and that's the end of it. So I think that's part of the reason why it's a little bit serious. The other part of it too, kind of hard to be sarcastic when there's no sarcasm font, is there, Twitter? So
yeah, I was going to say tone is completely gone.
Absolutely.
What I was going to say is the right and wrong part, and I think that's something that look, I want to be a profitable bettor. That's how I want to be, and the way that you are profitable is to try to be more right than wrong. Right. And what I learned in the first few years of being a content creator, but also just kind of betting regularly and posting picks, is that more than likely you're only going to hit, like, especially if you're betting minus 110 bets, more than likely you're not going to hit more than 60%. So there's at least going to be 4 times out of 10 that you're wrong. And what I realized is I wasn't making as many profits as that I wanted to, even though I was hitting, 60% of my bets. So here I am taking crap for 40% of the time and not having any money, or having money, but not really a ton of money to show for it. So I was like, you know what? I'll be right 30% of the time and have way more money. That's why I was like, you know what? Screw this, man. Screw win percentage. It's all about the ROI, and it's all about the profits. And that's what it came down to. And I think a lot of people, one thing that I've noticed as well, at least from my following, is I don't get crapped on as much anymore, because I think people now are understanding the strategy and understanding that there's a long-term goal here. And I think, but I think as well is that Ian said this last week, and I think this is very truthful, is I think people bet too much money on games. I think people bet beyond their means. I think a lot of people bet almost as more of like a get-rich-quick scheme, instead of looking at it as either a hobby that can make you money, or even just an endeavor that, can make you some money as well. Like, or even
it's a grind.
Yeah, but even at the same time, like this job that I do makes me money, but that doesn't mean that I'm all of a sudden going to make like, $50,000 in a month and then $1,000 the next month just because of how right I was in my content or whatever. It's like it's just more like there are no get rich quick schemes like that. Like when it comes to doing content, it's just about the hard work, and the results will show. And I think a lot of the time people sometimes just kind of lose sight in the fact of like, why are you even watching the game in the first place? Was it just a bet? Maybe you need to scale back a little bit. I think there needs to be both there. And that's the one reason why I watch like every football game, because I love football, but at the same time, I love having a little action on it as well. Putting a few units of my money on it, and hopefully I can make everybody else money too. And I think the one thing that people lose sight of as well is like, they think that like by me telling me that I'm wrong, that like maybe that might get to me or whatever else. It's like, look, I'm my biggest critic. Like nobody is more pissed off than me when I lose my bet. So you could be pissed off all you want, but at the same time, I'm the one sitting here just mad, not punching holes in the walls because I actually own a house now. But at the same time, just mad, about it. So I think that's the one thing too, is that people don't really understand the ebb and flows of betting, and that you can have good weeks and bad weeks. Like I had a bad week 3 in touchdown scores, or bad week 4 rather, but the first 3 weeks were incredible. But because the first 3 weeks were amazing and people were tailing, they think that I'm going to hit 50% of touchdown bets all the time, when the implied odds on them are less than 30% more often than not. So anyway, I just wanted people to know that. And I think that's something I want to hammer home every week, is just for anybody who does follow along, and it's just to reiterate that, like, if it's too much, if you feel like it's going to make or break your finances, scale back your units. If you're to the point like where you want to punch a hole in the wall because of a loss, maybe you need to reduce the amount of bets you're doing. And if it involves your favorite team, this is just a tip from me, bet against them. That's my favorite thing to do. I always bet against the Cowboys. It's the emo hedge, it's pay TV, it's whatever you want to call it. But the point is like, I would rather win some money if my team loses. And if somebody told me Cowboys are going to go 17-0 this year, but you got to lose 17 units, I'd be like, where do I sign? Like I'll give you 17 units right now. Like, you know what I mean? To give the 17-0 record. So so we're going to move on to another question here, because there might be some people who are watching, Josh, that are trying to get into the gambling and betting space, and also the fantasy space. People who are content creators who maybe be in the game for a while, or maybe people who are, just started a new podcast with their buddies and trying to see like where it's going, or maybe have been doing the grind for a couple of years and are looking for a break. And I guess the question that I wanted to ask you, Josh, because you are the head of content for the FTN network, and you see these people who are creating content and sending in submissions for potential jobs and whatever else. And I wanted to know, from your standpoint, what are some of the tips that you would recommend for maybe aspiring writers and content creators to get on with FTN or even another company, and how to succeed in the space, both in fantasy and sports betting?
So it's a great question, and it's something that I think gets answered very similarly, but I kind of want to dive into it a little bit deeper without taking up too much of your time. Essentially, it's one of these things where it's hard to create anything unique now. And what I mean by that is it's hard to create a stat. It's hard to create a model that nobody's ever touched on, right? But there are ways to better them. And something that I think a lot of content providers or aspiring content providers that try to make or break themselves into the industry right away don't realize is there are a million people that are willing to write down, whether it's great writing or poor writing, I like the Eagles this week, right? That can be said by a lot of people, and it's a very competitive space. The second part of that is the most important. It's the why. And that why is honestly the difference between some of the content providers that might be the best in the industry and some of the content providers that are on the breaking into the space and learning their voice and trying to figure out how maybe to make it full time, which is very, very tough to do in the space too. That why is the difference. And what I mean by that why is I like the Eagles because they're good. That doesn't do anything, right? Nope. It needs to be taken advantage of by different statistics or analysis or even trends that tell a story. And what I mean by this is using Elliot Chris on FTNBets does a single game parlay write-up for the big slates. Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football. He does a very good job of telling a story with his writing. And what I mean by this is he might say, hey, I like Thursday Night Football, whatever. We have Bengals, Jaguars, whatever it may be. And so here I'm breaking it down. So I think maybe the Jaguars are going to win tonight. So let me tell a story based on that prediction. And then you look at, okay, well, if the Jaguars are winning, it means that they might be running the ball more, and also means on the other side that the Bengals are throwing the ball more, and then you dive deeper into that, right? So when the Bengals throw the ball more, Joe Burrow's first read is Jamar Chase 11% of the time. So that kind of why is something that's very, very important, and it's also unique in the space because it takes a long time to research this. It really does. But knowing that week after week will put you in a much higher give you much more of an advantage over those that might not understand those stats, one, but also have the means to finding them. And all of those stats are available at FTN across those 3 sites. And it's one of these things that a lot of people will ask, so I'm glad you asked on the show. But finding that unique voice to tell a story rather than just giving your opinion. Because a lot of people have opinions, but not a lot of people can back them up with different levels of analysis to tell a story.
Exactly. And there's a lot of voices out there, and it's difficult to stand out. And I was lucky in a sense about 3 years ago when I first started betting touchdown scores. There were not really many people who were betting props, or at least that were out there willing to put their name on it, like in a sense from a reputation standpoint of like, here's my record just solely on props. And it was the 2018 NFL season. I was kind of one of the few people kind of betting touchdown scores, had a little bit of buzz. 2019 is when I kind of really took off because, again, there was nobody that was really posting plays for those and finding an edge for those. And then, of course, another thing that I did too is I was betting in-game turnover props and stuff like that. Just stuff like, again, that nobody was doing. And now you can't find somebody who isn't betting NFL props regularly. So, but the one thing that I would say here are the 2 tips that I would kind of give to people who are trying to break into the space. The first one that I would say is picks don't matter. And here's why I say this. I get people who write to me weekly, monthly, and just sometimes it's, people who are students, like they could be in a journalism program or, somebody, or it could just be somebody who has like 8,000 followers, but they're just trying to build up more and they're not really sure how to kind of grow their following and increase. And I think the main thing that I try to tell people is that picks don't matter. The picks, like, yes, obviously you want to be a winning bettor, and yes, you want to have a winning record, but you can't just write to you and say, hey, Josh, I'm 20-5 on my last 25 picks. Give me a job. Exactly. Because that's not the job. If the job was just to make picks, then you're just a tout. And then you might as well just sell your picks. And lots of people do that on Twitter. And I think that's the one thing that I'm trying to explain to people is that it's not that picks don't matter or the results don't matter. It's just saying that you have a record, but not creating any content that accompanies that is really, it's hollow. And doubling down on the content side. So, I mean, I went to school for journalism. I'm 37, so that was a long time ago now, back in my mid-20s. But I had a writing background, and I've had on-air performance, and I have lots of reps of writing articles, daily previews, being on camera, and being comfortable being on camera, and being able to present myself so that way, like it wasn't like, and I mean, let's just be real, I'm not that polished. But if you saw me 10 years ago, when I was on camera, it's night and day as far as my on-air delivery and just the way my cadence and the way that, like, so again, but that's because I put in the time of being on camera and doing things to be able to increase my skill level at being able to deliver information. And that's what I think people need to understand. And then, so the reps and the fact that, because just going back to the picks part, like one of the things that I always would get chirped by, like whenever it's like, so I would maybe like, let's use a football game. I go 0-3 in my touchdown scores. And then people are chirping me and they're like, how do you even have a job? Like that's the classic comment. And I'm like, well, that making picks isn't my job. And they're like, well, it is your job, right? You work for X company, thought it was your job to make picks. And it's like, okay, clearly you do not understand the industry. And so with that, the next tip that I would give, and there's a lot of demand for it, it's one of the reasons why I was kind of brought over to FTN, learn how to use SEO and how to do SEO writing. Because all of these sites that are popping up now, trying to get traction in Google and YouTube, how do you do that? You have to game the system with SEO tactics and being able to be at the top of rankings. So that way, when the casual bettor wants to look up something as simple as NFL odds, your company's website is near the top of that search. And I know that sounds pretty hollow, or it doesn't sound like it's much of a skill. People go to school for this. People like it's a very respectable thing in the content management and marketing standpoint. And I think that's the two main things that I would say is be able to generate content that isn't picks related always, and then also learn how to do that SEO stuff, because it will make you that much more valuable to a guy like yourself who is looking for people who are aspiring writers to maybe help branch out and carry this brand to the moon.
Yeah, that SEO skill set is something that I can't stress enough of. If you're watching and you want to acquire a skill set, that going back to what we just said, creating something unique, having the why, being able to put your message out there on different media, whether it's writing, podcast, audio, video, all of that sort of thing. Like Jill said, he comes from a background of being in journalism. Myself, I started in radio, but I didn't end up or finish school with a sports-related or media-related degree as I pivoted to business, but that is something that you can learn. Part of business, especially in digital media, and a large part of it is SEO. So if you don't know what that is, or you're really curious, a quick Google search, and I like to say it's a little bit of an art, right? If you search what is SEO, the number one person that you find, that first article will be 100% correct. You know why? Because they got the number one. So it's one of the easiest things to really think about in terms of what matters. But honestly, it's a very, very long art, and it's something that takes a little bit of time to master. But it really is an art, Jill. It's not necessarily a science. There are some scientific parts of it, but once you get to that level of the first page and you're ranking there, that's the part that the art comes in.
Yeah, and that's
very,
the
very
main thing that I'm just
skill.
trying to help people,
and
I think people, when I answer my DMs, they're not really sure what I'm meaning when I talk about SEO. It probably sounds like some weird acronym I just made up or whatever. And I'm trying to explain to people that this is the time to kind of like this past 2 to 3 years, especially going into this NFL season, like the content creation pool has just been overrun, and in a good way. Like, I'm so happy that people are out there, unique voices in the space, but there's people out there who want to be part of that too. And those would be the two best ways to learn how to do that, is get into the content creation side of things instead of more focusing just on the pick side of things, and learning search engine optimization.
100%.
All right, Josh, we're going to wrap up the show now with some rapid fire Q&A. So here's the goal here. I've got 7 questions for Josh. Try to keep your answers as brief as possible. If you want to expand on it, I'll allow it, but I will try to kind of bring you back in and move on to the next question. We're going to start off with a little bunny question here, and then we're going to keep going. So the first question, Josh, for rapid fire Q&A is, who's winning the AFC North?
AFC North, Baltimore Ravens. It's going to happen.
Ravens, nice pick. Okay, pick number 2. The Office or Parks and Rec? Which is better?
Okay, it's like asking to pick between 2 kids. I'm going to go with The Office. It's quite simply because the GIF game is way better. Whether you pronounce it GIF or GIF, no matter what, you get better ones from The Office. If that's a hot take, sorry about it. You're going to see Office ones on my Twitter.
Wrong. It was a trick question. The right answer is Seinfeld. Next question.
Well, here's a Seinfeld gift for you.
All right, now, Josh, we talked about this before the show. Please try not to be mad at me. I promise I would not make any short jokes in this interview. However, do you hesitate when having to consider an over or under bet because somebody might make a short joke?
Yes, 100%. I'm only allowed to bet overs. Because if I bet under, it literally leads directly to that. Hey, I like the under. Well, yeah, it's because you're short. every time. But no, honestly, I had a friend tell me long time ago, before I even knew what over-under was, the first thing he said, and it's one of the first conversations I remember, like this about betting, is the people that bet unders are sociopaths. It makes no sense at all, but for some reason it sticks in my head. And I think part of that comes from it's hard to root against points, right?
Well, I was going to say people who bet unders are negatrons. That's what I was going to say, is they don't like good things. It's sunny. They're like, it's probably going to rain. Like, you know what I mean? Like those kind of people. They're always just looking at the glass half empty analogy here. Okay, this is a two-part true or false question, so listen carefully. 2 parts. True or false? Derrick Henry will rush for 2,000 yards again in 2021, and he will also not be considered a top 3 NFL MVP candidate.
Both of those are true. I think he will rush for over 2,000 yards. We get the extra game, and we know he's going to get fed the whole time. But I also think it's going to be relatively impossible to win an MVP without being a quarterback with these extra stats now, because that's going to go into the voters' heads too. You're going to see, hey, a guy threw for 5,600 yards this year because we get that extra game. So I think that hurts him there.
The point that I always bring up for MVP is 2012. I always just look at it and I say, look, Adrian Peterson rushed for 2,000 yards that year, and he was a clear-cut MVP. Derrick Henry rushed for 2,000 yards last year, didn't even get a sniff of MVP. He was a top skill player, considered, you know what I mean? But he wasn't going to beat out Josh Allen. He wasn't going to beat out Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't going to beat out Mahomes. He probably wouldn't even have beat out Brady at one point. So, okay, moving on. Next question, Rams, Seahawks. Rams are -2. Which side are we taking here, Josh?
Rams, no doubt. 100%. That's one of my favorite bets to go along with the Packers. The Seahawks defense cannot stop anything, let alone Sean McVay and Matt Stafford.
We're going to throw a little trend alert here before we move on to the next question. I wanted to let you know that the Seahawks are 9-1 straight up and 7-2-1 against the spread in 10 games on Thursday Night Football with Russell Wilson as quarterback. I don't know. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
That is a very telling trend of how Russell Hustle performs on Thursday night. So again, you take that with what it is. He loses next week. I could say he's 9-2. You know what I mean?
Right.
Still make a compelling argument. Question next. If someone offered you 10,000 to 1 odds for the Jets to make the playoffs and you had to bet a full unit on it, would you take that bet?
I also heard one time, Jill, anytime somebody gives you 10,000 to 1, you take it.
The Kevin Malone special, right?
No matter what it is, take it.
See, I
don't agree with that, but for the Jets to make the playoffs, I'm taking that.
I do this question every week for people, and I always put this random BS team in there and be like, you think they can do this? You think they can do that? You might as well just take that money and donate it to charity. Come on, man. But at the same time, I know what you mean from an odds standpoint, but I feel like if you're betting on the Jets to make the playoffs in the AFC, the way that playoff picture is going right now, I'll be your bookie for that one. You just give the money to me.
Well, honestly, if the Jets, you just mentioned donate that money to charity. If the Jets make the playoffs and you bet a unit on that, you should donate that to charity anyway, because you already.
All right, Josh, final question. Please explain to everyone why Delaware is a great place to live and start a family.
Okay, let's see. All right, I've been waiting for this my whole life. It's the greatest
Tourist
question
brochure.
I've ever received. Okay, so first thing first, Delaware. You go anywhere, you go to buy something, it costs $1, right? In Delaware, you pay $1. It's not $1.06, it's not $1.08, it's not $1.11. No matter where you are, 0 sales tax. Also, you might live in New Jersey, you might live in New York, right? You're paying close to 4, 5, 6 times the amount of property taxes that you would be paying if you own property at all in Delaware. The final part is it's close to everything. Right. So Delaware might not be great. You can go to DC, you can go to Baltimore, you can go to New York, you can go down to the Outer Banks. You can take a quick 2-hour flight to Florida. You can fly wherever you want to go. There's airports in Baltimore, there's airports in Philadelphia. Would it surprise you if I said you can't fly out of Delaware to go anywhere?
Well, I'm more surprised about how you told me about all the places I could go instead of being in Delaware.
That's the best way to. That's how you do it. That's the best way to finagle the best part about Delaware. You live there, you go somewhere else.
All right. Now, Josh, before we go, I want you to help enlighten and tell the people who are watching, and if there's anybody left at this point, of how what we've got going on at FTN right now, FTN Bets, FTN Fantasy, some of the exciting stuff we've got in the works, some of the stuff that we've already pulled off coming into this season, and what we've got going on and how they can find it.
Well, so October honestly is my favorite month in content, especially in sports, because we already know the NFL started, right? Week 4 is in the books. We're already looking forward to the next week. College football is already there. At FTN, across the 3 sites, we do cover 13 sports, right? That's a lot. And a lot of them start in the fall. College football is already in full swing, as we just mentioned, but college basketball is just around the corner. Right. I know you love the NBA. That's starting very shortly, too, with the preseason going. I'm excited for that, too. The NHL season starts next week. We have Chris Meany, who was up over 100 units in hockey last year. Unbelievable. He's found a market that's very, very exploitable, so be sure to check that out as well. But it's the best part of the year to me in the fall when you have all these sports happening at the same time. And don't forget the baseball playoffs are happening as well. So something to definitely take advantage of over at FTN, Fantasy Daily, and Bets.com. FTN Bets going to have a brand new special coming out for the rest of the NFL season. But we also have NBA early birds up as well. So be sure to take advantage of those because they do go quickly, as you can tell by looking at your Twitter. That's for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's all from me. I want to thank Josh Collachi and the head of content at FTN Network for joining me. And all of my writing content is over at FTN Bets. You can catch me every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern for Touchdown Town on BetsTV, where I give out my best touchdown scores of the week with Brendan Dawg from National Football Post. Thank you all for watching Dog Day Afternoon. I'm Gilles Gallant with BetsTV. Bon chance.